lead the final battle. The Bible speaks of a chilling prophecy, a time when 4 fallen angels, chained at the Euphrates River, will be unleashed to bring chaos and destruction upon the earth. These angels, once among the most powerful in heaven, rebelled against God and were cast down, bound in chains, awaiting their fateful hour. When they are finally set free, they will lead an army so massive that it is described as numbering 200 million, a force of unimaginable magnitude. As they march forward, the earth will tremble. Their mission? To unleash devastation as part of God's judgment during the end times. But the story doesn't end there. The Bible tells us this is not just a battle of flesh and blood. It's a cosmic war, good versus evil, heaven versus hell. The 4 fallen angels will wreak havoc, but their reign will be short-lived. In the final moments, the armies of darkness will face the ultimate defeat. Jesus, riding on a white horse, leading the heavenly host, will descend in glory. With a single word, he will strike down the forces of evil, and the power of these angels will be extinguished forever. Their rebellion will come full circle as they face the eternal justice of God. They will be cast into the lake of fire, never to rise again. This prophecy serves as both a warning and a reminder of God's sovereignty. The end times are a call to prepare our hearts, to choose the side of light before it's too late. Will you be ready when the final battle begins? Type Amen and share this message to remind
co-host Dominic, and again we have a returning guest, one of my favorite guests, Gary Wayne, and today we're going to be discussing the sons of God, the fallen angels, pretty much the Nephilim, and even into detail of the lion men of Moab. Is that how you say it, Moab? I think so.
Yeah.
So it's exactly what it sounds like. They're like these lion head humanoids. But anyways, without further ado, Gary Wayne, go ahead and introduce yourself again and tell us about, where to get your book at and all that good stuff.
Yeah, so thank you for inviting me back to your podcast. I'm so happy to be back with you guys again, and I'm back home at my home in Vancouver, which is always good. I like to go to the lake for the summer, but I also like to get back to my home. So, for people who may not be aware of me, my name is Gary Wayne. I wrote the book called The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, How Secret Societies and the Descendants of Giants Plan to Enslave Humankind. And I have a website if you like what I'm talking about and you want to hear more about the book or you want to purchase a book or get a hold of me, you can go to my website, thegenesis6conspiracy.com. That's the number 6conspiracy.com. And on that page, there's a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters. And on the web, on the media page on the website, if you want to get a hold of me, where it says contact Gary Wayne for an interview, click on that. And that's my email address, genesis6conspiracy@gmail.com, genesis6conspiracy@gmail.com. And that will come right through to me. It might take me a couple, 3 months to get back to you, but I will get back to you. And
as long as you get back to them.
And if you're wanting to get a signed copy, then you just go over to the Buy Now page and you can order through the website there, where you can, if you're in Canada, you go to the Canada page. If you're in the U.S., you go to the U.S. page. If you're into anywhere else in the world, Europe, Australia, South America, wherever, there's an overseas page, so you can click there to get a signed copy. If you want to look at buying from Amazon, you can link right over from the website page to Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, and BarnesandNoble.com. And you can also link over to get the digital version if you're wanting that as well. So that's the easiest, best way to get a hold of my book. My new book that we'll talk a little bit later on in the show will also be available on that website. I've got my website man working on it, or starting to work on the website. So we'll get a more visible contact the author button on there, I hope. And we'll be putting up all 84 chapters of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2 with generous excerpts and pictures again. And it'll be available off the same website, complete with bundle pricing if you're wanting to buy multiple books, as in one of each or multiple of the same. It's doesn't really matter. It's just however you want to buy it. You can buy it single, you can buy it multiples, but I'll have bundle pricing available for everybody on that. So lots of things going on. Hoping to have the new book out in October or November. And I'm in the typeset stage of the editing right now, and I'm hoping to turn that around here by the middle of next week so we can stay on an October delivery date.
Amen to that. I can't wait for that book to come out. And really quick, Gary Wayne, just so you know, you were our first guest last year in October. So that'll be pretty cool if your book comes out next month. That'll be our 1-year anniversary, and you were our first guest for the Halloween special that we did. That'd be great.
Yeah, as I remember, that was a pretty darn good Halloween show.
Oh, man.
So if people haven't seen that or heard that, I highly recommend that, because I think we got into things that you're not going to find anywhere else.
We definitely did. It's the most downloaded podcast out of all our episodes. Yep. And yeah, it's the first one. It will have more, but there's other episodes that climbed, above other episodes. But that one is still the number one. It has over 1,000 downloads.
Wow.
Yeah, it's good. It's good stuff. And I encourage people out there who haven't gotten Gary's first book to get that and read it. It's got a lot of information on it in it. It's very, very good, very well detailed with citations and all that other good stuff that goes on with the scholarly type of written book. It was great, Gary. I still reference your book a lot for some of my shows. I have to.
Well, it does cover a lot of information, and one thing that I've done differently in the new book is I've moved it from endnotes to footnotes, so that when you're reading the page, you're going to have the footnote on the same page with all the information, and I put more information in the footnotes, and I've got definitions and all sorts of other things that sort of go on that. I didn't want to sort of get down too many rabbit trails within the text of the narrative. Right. So I think one of the things that I did well, that I liked what we got, I get a lot of good feedback on it, is that I put all my sources in there. Now I'm going to make those sources more accessible, and I'm going to give you more information on those sources and more information within the text of the footnotes. And where in the first book, I used a lot of sources that I was using that were not of the Christian belief. I wanted them to talk in their own words and not manipulate what they were saying. I go directly to the sources this time. And so that bank of knowledge will be very helpful for most people's libraries for research and reference.
Absolutely. It's timeless. So tonight's show, let's jump into the first topic.
How we're going to do this? We're going to start off with the sons of God.
Sons of God.
B'nai Elohim, Genesis.
Who are the sons of God? How far back do they go? What's the classifications of them? Some say have wings. Some say they don't have wings. Some say there are space brothers or the Alpha race. Some say there are siblings. And Gary, for me, when I hear stuff like that, I say, okay, well, what does the Bible say about that? Are they? Because I look at it as, from a scientific aspect, I look at it. Are they genetically the same as us right now in our present state? Are they technically our genetic brothers? If they went out and made it with women and had giants, I don't think we don't do that. We don't make with a woman and have a 20-footer.
Two evil people don't make a giant, you know what I mean? As the Seth theory would be. But yeah, there's definitely a genetic altercation that happens in there that causes them to grow way too big.
Take it away, Gary. You're the man.
Well, it's such a great question, and it's actually quite a large subject, and a lot larger than most people think, and certainly a lot larger than most Christians think, because taught in the churches, just as all of prehistory and prophecy, they're not really taught in the churches. The whole context of the Bible isn't taught. A lot of good things are taught, but it's taught without the context of angels and how much information that we actually have on them. And there is a lot. And they're not to be worshipped or venerated or anything like that. But we need to know about them, because there are a number of them, and some people would say there was at least 33 million or 50 million that rebelled or will have rebelled, because in the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation, we're told the number is 10,000 times 10,000, which is 100 million of angels that are before the throne. So depending on how you want to calculate that third, there's 33 or 50 million, or maybe it's even more. Maybe that's more of a allegorical number than an accurate number. I read it as literal, but it could be more, because other places in the Bible we're going to be told that they are uncountable. They're like the stars in the sky, and they're typically, stars is one of the allegories for an angel. So there's a lot who are working against us, and they're part of that whole organizational structure of the Council of the Gods in Psalms 82 that rules over the nations in Deuteronomy 32. And these are, the council of the gods that rule until the end time. And so these are the rebellious ones, and we live in their world. We live in their legal-based, oath-based system that they have imposed over us. So it's important to understand this context, and that there was a rebellion, and the Adamites, in my opinion, are the solution and the resolution to the angelic rebellion. And so we're intimately connected with them. So we need to know more about them, and we need to dig deeper. And so, yeah, there's a fair bit of information in there, and there's many different orders of these angels. So there's not just, one kind of angel, and they have a rank and an order. So there's a Hebrew word called Saba, which means, and as it's translated to the King James Version Bible, as the host of heaven. There's a host of rebellious ones, and that word host means an army of angels, and rank and orders of angels. So I think the first place to begin with is, once we know that, is we need to sort of define them. Are they physical or are they spiritual? And angels are spiritual from the heavenly realm. Right. They're not of the physical realm. So you might say they are alien to the physical world because they are from another dimension. And even the ones that rebelled, their heaven is not the heaven of God. It is the heaven that's below. It's the heaven that's in the earth in another dimension that they would call the other world, the underworld, and when 1,000 different names biblically, we would understand that as Sheol and as Hades, and that they have the ability to come through those portals and into this physical world. So they are spiritual beings. They are the invisible ones that is talked about in the New Testament, just as the disembodied spirits of their offspring are invisible ones that we would know as demons. And demons are the ones that Jesus is dealing with in the New Testament when he's dealing with the devils, and used in conjunction with devils as unclean spirit and evil spirit. And I'm not here today to talk about the demons, but just so that you know, they're part of the invisible ones, because these are the disembodied spirits of the giants. So if we understand that angels are spirit beings and that they can enter into this world as a spirit being, it doesn't answer the question as to how they're able to create offspring sexually, as it's described in Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4, and described all around the world in all cultures around the world, on all continents, except for maybe Antarctica. Who knows what we'll find down there.
Yeah.
That something else has to be going on, or they use some sort of technology. But I tend to read the Bible literally, and I understand where the allegories are and the similes, and those are always defined within the Bible. So when we have the sons of God that are mating with human females to create giants, you see that superlative sort of nature or being that can all of a sudden create these kinds of giants. So they can take a physical form, and they have this changeling quality. They have the ability to take any form that they want, any gender that they want. And so that's partly where the changeling understanding of the occult comes from. So like in, let's say, Greek mythology, for example, Zeus turned into a wolf. And in doing so, in one of those incarnations as a wolf, you create the werewolf mythology or history of changing King Lycaon's family all into werewolves. So we get these accounts all around the world. But biblically, we understand they can take a physical form too. And we see angels in all different kinds of forms throughout the Bible, but it's the physical one that most Christians sort of get hung up on. And I think they ought to be that detailed, that they want to know how a being can create offspring with a physical being. So we know they can take a human form because two angels show up as men, first thought to be men and then understood as angels, with the pre-existent Jesus who goes in to meet with Abraham just before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And so these two, with the angel of the Lord, Yahuah, the Elohim, you have individuals that angelic beings that take a form of a man, and they can drink, they can eat, they can touch and shake hands, they can do everything physically. So they can manifest that somehow, some way. They have that ability to do that. And then when you get into the Sodom and Gomorrah destruction, which follows immediately after this encounter, you have the two angels that show up at Sodom, and they're recognized as men and angels, and they want to have sex with them. So whether or not it's them wanting to have homosexual sex, they want them to switch their gender, or they want their daughters to have sex with them, we're not told, but we know men and all the people of Sodom showed up. So there was many people, probably many genders. Well, two genders. I don't want to fall into that.
Don't get in that rabbit hole right now.
I apologize sincerely.
You're going to get crucified right now.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow. So anyways, so we get that encounter, and we get other encounters of angels showing up and looking like men throughout the Bible. But the most important one, I think, that maybe will resonate with Christians is that in the book of Hebrews, it clearly tells us that you should be kind to strangers, because you never know when you're going to be interacting with an angel. And that means they can take a physical form.
Gary, really quick, I just want to say something. When you say all the people wanted to have sex with the two angels, wouldn't it be these two angels look different from everybody else if they recognized them immediately? They had to look different, right?
Yeah, they're called men, but they are recognized as angels. So it could be at that point in time, because they were going in as judges, they were maybe
dressed
differently, or shining, or something about them had indicated that they knew that they were angels. Or maybe there was some spies that had reported that.
Yeah, that always blew my mind. It's like immediately they knew these two people were angels. Either they were, like you said, or they were really tall, muscular, good-looking guys. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Or maybe they're fallen angels that they worship to. Maybe they informed them or something.
Yeah,
I mean,
maybe.
However it happens, they recognize them as soon as they come into the city. So obviously there's a piece of information as to why that we don't have there. But the important thing is that they can take this physical form. And they can look like men. Sometimes they can be recognized as men. Sometimes they can't be. So they would have had the ability to make whatever that adjustment was, and they were coming there to judge the city. So one might think that the answer would be more that they decided to make it clear that they were angels in men form, and whatever format that was that made them recognizable. So. Okay. So it's important to understand then that somehow they can take a physical form. And if that's the case, then biblically we probably should have something within the Bible that suggests how that can happen, other than they are just very, very powerful, and it's part of their gifts to be able to do it. So in the book of Jude, in 1:6, it talks to us about the fallen angels that left their habitation. And that word habitation is one of the keys to understanding how they take a physical form. And that's the Greek word oikaterion. And what it means is a dwelling place for a spirit. So they left their oikaterion, their habitation of heaven, of their first origin, and they left that in a manner where they're not coming back. In this case, although loyal angels would be able to change into a physical form and still come back. So what's important to understand here is that this word oikaterion is used one other time in the New Testament, with the New Testament originally being in Greek. So we go into 2 Corinthians 5:2, and it's talking about the house in heaven. In 2 Corinthians 5:2, for people who might have missed that. And that's the Greek word oikaterion. And this house in heaven is the place that we as humans are groaning for as followers of God and Jesus. And that this will be a home for us, or a dwelling place for our spirit when we go to heaven after the resurrection. And so when we look at how that sort of makes some sense to us is that this oikaterion reflects our nature in this physical world, that we have a heavenly oikaterion, which is a dwelling place for the spirit that God provided us from heaven. And this oikaterion is the soul and the body. So one needs to sort of understand that the soul and the body is the oikaterion of the physical world. And it's where the spirit moves into the soul, and which is in the body, and merges with the soul. So the soul and the body is from the physical world. And the spirit, even with humans, comes from heaven. So we have that oikaterion. So what the angels are able to do is they're able to create a soul in the physical world and a body, and possess that oikaterion so that they can physically interact in the world. So if we understand that, and that we've seen witness now with the examples that I provided within the Bible, then we can start to understand that if you are going to create a physical body, then you have the ability to create DNA. And if you're creating DNA, whatever you put into that DNA as the body that they're creating, that is the genes and the DNA that are going to be passed on to the spirit's offspring. So now they're physical, they can create the ability to produce with human females. One presumes that, and certainly we get these accounts in polytheism, as in the Sumerian tradition and the Greek tradition and others, where you have goddesses, which is that female version of an angel taking a different gender, who mate with humans, in this case human males, to create a giant, just as Lugalbanda, king of Uruk, is the father of Gilgamesh, and Nin, the fertility goddess, is the female, and Enkidu is created in the same way. And they're 2/3 God and 1/3 human. So these are demigods. So that gets us into this kind of understanding of so what do angels look like? So that we would probably get a better idea as to what the giants looked like, which were their spirits or their illegitimate offspring. It's a violation of the laws of creation.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's important that we know that this is not permitted by God, but that doesn't mean, in terms of the law, but that does not mean that the angels didn't have free choice to break the law, at
Right.
least for a time. Certainly before the flood, seems likely again after the flood for a short time to create these kinds of giants. But if they passed on the DNA of what they look like, then their offspring would look like them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a significant sort of concept. So I want to also talk about the connection in the Old Testament when we talk about the sons of God that are angels in Genesis 6. How do we know these are angels?
Right.
Well, that word sons of God is used more than once in the Old Testament. And so we get the sons of God that are talked about in Job 1:6 and 2:1 when they go to present themselves. And as the book of Enoch talks about, angels have to present themselves at a specific time. And it also talks about in the book of Enoch that when they didn't report, that was the beginning to the larger rebellion, when deduces Satan would have rebelled sooner, but then you have a larger rebellion. And these are the sons of God in the book of Enoch that are going to produce the giants, the NEPHILIM, which is the Hebrew word for giant. And they're called watchers as well as sons of God in the book of Enoch. And understanding that the sons of God are angels is very, very important, and understood from another passage in the Old Testament is Psalms 82 that we talked about earlier, where you have the mighty, the council of the mighty, which is the Hebrew word El. So this is the council of the gods. And just as we see that spelled out as gods as well, which goes back to El, as in angel or a god, and that these are the sons of the God Most High. So same understanding. So when you have sons of God, that's Ha Ben Elohim, the sons of God, and this would be sons of the Most High, which is God the Bible, Elohim, in the superlative nature, another name for him. Again, it is Ha Bene Elion. So it's the same understanding that these are the sons of God. We know that they're part of a series of names that are referenced as angel as a specific order, angels as a generic name for angels in the Old Testament, and for the sons of God, in this case, being part of the angels, also as the host and also as stars. And in the Old Testament, they're used kind of interchangeably together. So that, for example, in Psalms 148:1, or 148:1 and 2, it's talking about praising God from the heavens, just as in in Job 38:4-7, you have the morning stars and the sons of God who are praising and dancing with God's creation of the universe. So they're there at creation, and only the angels are there at creation. So clearly, sons of God and morning stars, which is another order of stars, or of angels, were dancing and praising God at that time. But in Psalms 148, it says, "Praise ye him, all his angels, pray ye him, all his hosts." So now we have angels and hosts used together, just as we had stars and sons of God used together in Job. And then what's also interesting, and I won't go through all the passages, I just want to sort of make some connections here. In Daniel 8:10, which is the passage where Antichrist in the end time is going to enter into heaven along with the other angels, it talks about the stars as part of the host of heaven. So in the passage in 8:10 says, and it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host of the stars and stamped them upon the earth. So the stars are angels like the sons of God in the book of Job, in Job 38. The stars are what angels are called, and the angels are the host, and so are the stars part of the host, and they're all part of this Saba army rank and order of angels. And so if we understand that the idea that these were Sethites, that's not possible, because they couldn't create something not only larger but also with super preternatural gifts. Some people might say that, you know, in the Old Testament, Israel is called the sons of God. But that's in both of those passages. One of them is in the book of Hosea. And if people want to get a hold of me, I have a great document on how we know the angels are sons of God. I walk through all of it. But even in the book of Isaiah, where it talks about that, this is a prophecy of the second Exodus that happens in the last 3.5 years. It's a future event where Israel is going to be talked about being sons of God. And this is after they've accepted their Messiah, Jesus, after many of the resurrections have already happened. At the time of Jacob's trouble, at the time of trouble in Daniel 12, and the resurrections for them, for some to everlasting life and some to death as well, as talked about in Daniel 12. This is the time of Ezekiel 37, where you have the dry bones rising up and all of Israel being marched to them, the lost tribes who will awaken in Judah, and they'll all join together for this reconciliation back into the Holy Covenant in time for the Supper of the Lamb. And so when we look at what all of this is telling us is that not only are the people of Israel not the sons of God, neither are the sons of God in the New Testament. The sons of God is a prophetic sons of God when we're going to be adopted through the resurrection to be like angels after the resurrection that was cemented at the Pentecost with that promise, so that we can be like gods and adopted by Jesus as our brother, who also was resurrected. So we resurrected with the same kind of body, but that has nothing to do with what happened in the past. And what it's actually doing is it's talking about the veracity of who the original sons of God are, because we will be like those angels.
Thank you, Gary. Because a lot of people don't get that. They confuse who we are now with the angels, that we're like them. They're our space brothers. They're the elder race. And it's just, I don't know where they get this stuff from, but when you just look at the word like, when the Bible says we'll be like the angels, it says having the same characteristics or qualities as, similar to, quote, they were like brothers, unquote. So it's kind of like a basketball and a football. They're both balls, right? But they're not the same, created the same. You know, angels were created by God. We were created from a man and a woman. And like you were saying previously, that you were defining, you know, what this really means, that the word sons of God. And I really appreciate that, for you clearing that up.
Yeah, I think it's important that we're able to go back and give passages that are not in conflict with anything else in the Bible. And that's really the key that you want to be able to do. Anybody can sort of take one passage and take it out of context.
Well, yeah, Gary. I mean, there's some speakers out there that say that because they said the angels are extraterrestrials and they're our brothers, and I'm just wow. So by saying that, by that reasoning, if they're extraterrestrials, that means God's extraterrestrial. That means we're extraterrestrial. So we're back to Ancient Aliens Part 2.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just crazy. It's wild. out there, even in these Christian circles, and you have these speakers talking about this stuff. I'm like, man, where'd they get this stuff from? I just don't understand it.
Well, they get it, a lot of it from the churches. Because, again, the churches don't want to deal with this in a manner that they have to deal with the other questions that then would come along with it.
Yeah.
And so, and the thing is, they're not even prepared to talk about it because they're not taught about this in seminary schools. So they have no ability to talk about it.
Correct.
And what happens is typically if you want to push the questions on this, then you're going to be told to stop asking those questions or you'll be asked to leave the church.
Right.
And that's not an answer.
No, it's not.
That is something that should raise a red flag, but you shouldn't necessarily think that they might be Gnostic or anything like that. But what it should tell you is that they're not as knowledgeable on the whole Bible, and that means you're going to need to dig deeper into the Bible yourself.
Right. So true. So true. And you were finishing up on.
I also have a question really quick, Gary.
Right.
So, because this is something that I've been trying to understand. How did the giants mate with the women? Not the fallen angels, but there are stories. I mean, maybe not in the Bible, but there are other non-biblical stories in history where the giants mate with women. I mean, without me, getting too much detail, it sounds physically impossible. Maybe they did it when they were young, before they got too big, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's an obstacle, but it's kind of sort of shown in some of the reliefs and things that come out of the Middle East. So I think with before the flood, that the Nephilim didn't seem to have a fertility issue.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that they didn't mate with humans. And they probably did, and they probably would have done it in the same way as the post-Diluvian Rephaim. If people aren't familiar with Rephaim, that's what's used for giant 25 times in the Old Testament, where Neph is only used 3 times in the original Hebrew. And so there's a distinction between the Rephaim and the Nephilim, and it's the Rephaim that we're dealing with after the flood. And the only other 2 times Nephilim is named as a giant when it's calling in the embellished part of the report in Numbers 13:33. It's used twice, where the Anakim are the sons of giants, which is the Hebrew word Nephil, and Nephilim is the male plural. The Anakim or Rephaim, as they're described in Deuteronomy 2, giants in that application, as with the Emine and Horim and the other giants that are mentioned there, goes back to Rapha and Rephaim as the male plural. So after the flood, though, these giants have a fertility issue.
Okay.
And that shows up in the word terrible ones that we see in Ezekiel 32 as sort of the best example, although it will also show up in other passages like Isaiah 25 in the first 10 verses. And I really, you want to start to get your head rolling on some things. Read Ezekiel 32, then read Isaiah 25. And it's also mentioned as the terrible ones in Isaiah 14 as well. And that's a loaded passage as well. It's part of a dual prophecy that begins in Isaiah 13. And in that understanding of terrible ones, that is like Nephilim is I am is the plural, and the I am means ones and is the plural. So they're like the giant ones, just as the seraphim are the serpent-faced ones that Isaiah 6 talks about. Seraphim, they had serpent faces. They're 6-winged dragons, heavenly dragons, so to speak. And so when we look at the terrible ones, that's the Hebrew word arit. And you put on the I am and you get the eritim. So that would be the true sort of plural form of the terrible ones that are being talked about in those passages. And so in the definition of the terrible ones, the eretim, you have many descriptions that are going to describe a giant like being stout or wide and strong and words like that, but also childless and fertility issues. And it seems to have shown up with not that they couldn't produce the seed to do it, it's that they weren't producing enough females to continue to produce. So we're going to see more of this after the flood is the point because of that fertility issue. They needed to find a way lest they went extinct. And so they had to create the hybrids, hybrid Rephaim humans that weren't as tall. They're called the Shazu in the execration text, the Amu and the Shamau in more of the Mesopotamian references to them. They were 7 to 9 feet tall, whereas the giants were 10 to, let's say, 19 feet tall if you take the height of Gilgamesh after the flood as being almost 19 feet. And of course, they had a 2-to-1 height to width ratio. So that's why when you get the reference of Gog's bed or Og's bed at 9 cubits, and he was the king of Uruk, so it'd be a 21-inch cubit versus an 18. And just as Josephus says, you need to measure the giants on a royal cubit because they're all kings and royals. He would have had a bed that's almost 16 feet tall, and it was 4 cubits wide, so 7 feet wide. So he would have been a little bit smaller than that, so smaller than Gilgamesh, but let's say 13, 14, 15 feet tall. And he would have had about let's say 6 feet wide at the max to fit in the bed, and or 5 feet wide. So he would have been very close to that same 2-to-1 height to width ratio that the cubits are talking about. And that was a standard that they left for people to understand that these weren't just normal humans. It was there to be on display at Rabbah after the defeat of Sihon and Og, so all the generations would remember. And they would also put bones on display, according to Josephus.
I was about to say that, yep.
They were unlike humans in any sort of manner because they would have to be to support that kind of weight. They were something completely different. So we know that they created these hybrids, and they show up as the patriarchless 9 tribes of Canaan. Canaan is a patriarch in the 70 nations. Heth is Suicidon, but the 9 patriarchs for the rest of the families, which goes back to the Hebrew word that says essentially family, but also, and more accurately, I think, different race, different kind, different species of people were the patriarchs. And Rephaim patriarchs aren't listed in the table of nations, just like Arba, the patriarch, as the book of Joshua talks about, for the Anakim isn't listed in the table of nations, and neither is Rapha, the patriarch for the Rephaim tribe that is living in the Mount Hermon area that's recorded in the War of Giants in Genesis 14, and in the land that's being given to Abraham in Genesis 15. The Rephaim are listed amongst what I call the mighty 10 of that time versus the mighty 7 that are listed in the time of the book of Exodus. So they had to find a way to do it, and the Bible shows us that they did. And we also get a marriage in Genesis 36 between Timnah, a Horim, son of Seir, which goes back to the Hebrew word satir, and Eliphaz, son of Esau, to create the hybrid Amalekite race. But typically, you would, if they had a fertility issue with the women, not many would be reproducing with humankind because they would want to preserve more of the bloodline. So what's going to be happening is you're going to have the males reproducing with the females of the Canaanites and others who would have intermarried with the giants. So now we get back to the question is those giants, even though they're smaller than the Nephilim, they're probably still too large to have sex without killing the mother.
Yes.
Or the babies being born without killing the mother. Well, before the flood, when the babies were born, according to the Keber Nagast of the Old Testament, the Ethiopian copy, and other sources, the mothers died. And they did a cesarean type of birth to do that. But how they actually did the act seems to be more closely associated with what we see on those reliefs. And a lot of those fertility rituals is you have these depictions of these giants, and some people say they're gods, but I think they're giants because the angels could take a smaller size if they wanted to, but it wouldn't help in the birth of them. But what they do in these reliefs is that they're pouring semen into the women.
That's wild.
And that seemingly is how they did it, and they did it in a ritual act. We also know that the Rephaim had a fertility issue in the Ugaritic text, which is a very good source for having a parallel account of so much of what is talked about the Rephaim and in the time of the Exodus and before. And in there you have the Rapiu, and RPM is the Semitic root word for Rephaim, and produces the transliterated translations that we see, Rapiu and Rapium, for the Rephaim in the Ugaritic text, who worship Baal and Ashtaroth, who they accredit with creating them after the flood, and that they are having a fertility issue. So at some point in time, Baal and Ashtaroth and all the ones who would have created these crimes after the flood of creating giants, violations against the laws of creation, would have went to the abyss just like the parent gods did. The parent god of Baal was El, who he overthrew. I don't think he overthrew him. El just went to the abyss before the flood for his illicit crimes, and he's was notorious in outside biblical accounts of not only being a horrible tyrant god, but for creating giants. And so they're doing fertility rituals to somehow bring Baal and the Baalim back to create more Rephaim demigods because they're going extinct. And I think that's what drives them into reproducing with humans, and probably through transplanting their semen into women, because it would have taken, I think, another you continue to do this, right? So once they get into the second and third and fourth generations, then they're probably just reproducing with hybrid Rephaim and humans after that.
Okay, I just wanted to get that down because I've heard stories about the Native Americans, how they would say their women would get taken and they would get raped to death. And there's also some conquistadors where they would try to do the same thing to the women, but at some point these things are being born, so they're getting it done some way. Have you ever
but also consider that, I mean, that would be happening because they didn't have respect for humans.
Yeah.
So, and they may have been doing that in rituals, and they didn't care whether the woman died at that point, right? Yeah. But if they wanted to reproduce and them to have the baby, whether or not they survived after that, they would have to find a way to keep her alive.
Yeah. I was going to say, have you ever read a book called The Mysteries of Solomon Island?
I'm trying to, it's familiar, but it's not ringing a bell as to what it was about. But the name is very familiar.
Pretty much, long story short, it's supposed to be based on a true story. A guy went out there, did some research, and supposedly met a giant. And just to get to the subject I'm talking about in the book, he described that some of these giants, they would mate with the human females when they were like 13, 14 before they got too big. Apparently these giants were about 12 to 15 feet tall, but when they were like, in the ages between, 10 and 15, they were about 6 foot, 7 foot. They were still at the size where they can mate with human females. But
so right after they went through puberty.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. If they go through puberty.
Yeah, exactly.
I just, it's just interesting, I mean, it's, people are probably, why are you asking that? Well, it's interesting. I want to know what happened.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because if we're saying that they reproduced with women, how?
Yeah, exactly.
And to me, that's a legitimate question. Those are the types of questions I ask on anything. So, and that's why I, did so much research on this, because I just don't want to accept, if I don't have to,
that
this happened. I'm going, okay, got it, but how? It makes no sense to me.
And
You're going to have to explain it to me.
I would also assume that the angels are male or of masculine, they have a masculine kind of vibe to them, because the Bible says they lusted after women. They lusted after men. They lusted after the women. Does that mean 100% they're all of masculine origin, correct? Or
Well, from a biblical perspective, yes, I would say yes to that, but I would leave a crack open, and again, it could be just fallen angels creating a counterfeit and a corruption of the same story, but just as in the Ugaritic text, they want Ashtaroth to be part of recreating Rephaim as well. And that's the consort of Baal. And just as Nin, which is a fertility goddess in the Sumerian text when Gilgamesh is created after the flood, 6th generation, that they believe that that's the case. I can only use that as a possibility. What I do know is you have female goddesses in the pantheon. And they seem to have the ability to take that form. And one would presume that if they wanted to do that, they could create the ovaries and the things needed to produce the giants and demigods. So I leave a small crack open for that, but certainly from what we're told within the giants that are described within the Bible, we're not told that any of the angels take a female form. That doesn't mean there aren't female forms, because the book of Zechariah has 2 female angels delivering the basket of Babylon in the end time.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. So again, I hold a sort of a small crack open there, and I cover that. I cover that passage off in the new book as well.
Really quick, what book was that in? The 2 female angels?
Book of Zechariah. Okay,
Zechariah.
Where they take the ephod of Babylon and the woman. Mm-hmm. There's 2 female angels.
Right. I think we covered that in Revelation series. Yeah, the 2 female angels. That was a great. We'll call that segment 1. Segment 2. I wanted to bring up something that's not really talked about, and that's the lion men in the Bible. How, Gary, in your opinion, were they created, if they were in fact lion men, or was it a product of some kind of disease? And what does antiquity have to say about the lion men outside of the biblical canon?
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to the different kinds of the angels. And so we have depictions of seraphim, which are serpent-faced angels, which are watchers. And we have archangels that tend to have a single face, like a human, as depictions. We don't get that as a definition, but when they're always sort of depicted, but they could have a different look to them, the archangels. So we have to be careful with that one. But you also have, as part of the watchers, at the top of the hierarchy of all the 4 groups, and they would cover each of the 4 sides around the throne, and then that hierarchy goes down into the earth. So like the seraphim, for example, they handle the governments and the religion. So you have the seraphim at the head, and then you have the powers that are right below them, and then the angels underneath them. So they would have them as their messengers or whatever. And on the religious side, you have the seraphim at the head, and then the principalities, and then angels below that. And with the archangels, which are the warrior army angels, you have archangels at the top, you have the mighties underneath, and also you could put in the Icarus in there as well, and the soldier angels underneath. And then you have the cherubim and the Ophanim, which are looking after the thrones. Just as God has the throne of God, there's a counterfeit throne of God that Satan has, and all of the Satans have. And you have dominions and angels serving underneath that as well. And so Ophanim are not mentioned in the Bible literally, but in an English translation, but the Book of Enoch mentions them, and they're the ones part that are in around the Book of Ezekiel in Ezekiel 1, 3, and 10 talks about these wheels that go around in wheels, and that goes back to the Hebrew word gal, but it's also talking about these angels that have all of these eyes that are within the wheels, and one of them has the face of a cherub. They actually have 4 faces, and one of them is different because one of them is the face of a cherub. And so those are the Ophanim, and those wheel beings, when it's called wheels, referring to those angels in those wheels, as opposed to the wheels, that's Ophan is the Hebrew word, and the Ophanim is the male plural. So the cherubim are warrior-like angels as well. In fact, you have angels with flaming swords that are cherubim that are posted at the gates of Eden after Adam and Eve are ostracized from the garden. And you have 4 faces that are on a cherubim as well. Now, cherubim tend to take one of those faces when they take the physical form in the physical world. So those 4 faces of a cherubim are, one is a ox or a bull, one is an eagle, one is a human, and one is a lion. So now we have these lion men of Moab that are talked about in the time of David. Mm-hmm. And lion goes back to the Hebrew word eri, and very much connected with at 738 and 739 is Ariel, which means a hero. And Eri is also part of the sort of the word that's connected into Aryan as well, but that's a different rabbit hole. And then you also have 740 Ariel, and you get Ariel as an angel in the occult. We don't get one of that names that's involved in the Bible, but you get the word Ariel, and that means a lion of God. Just as Michael, ending in El, is a name of an angel. Gabriel ends in El. Halel for Satan in Isaiah 14. Uriel, sort of, El ends up the name of an angel. So we get these linemen of Moab that are talked about as wilderness men in terms of the form as they show up with the Gadites in the Bible as well. And these Gadites are wilderness men, and that goes back to the Hebrew word Gibborim. Again, a word that can describe giants. Mm-hmm. So you have a being that has faces of lions that are warriors that we don't have an explanation for biblically. We do get a God that is named in the Bible, who is one of the gods of that's in the Mesopotamian pantheon, and he's in the area of the Avim, the Eastern Avim, and they're a Rephaim tribe, and this god is Nergal. And Al is a transliteration of El for a god or an angel, just as Il is or Ilu is. And we see that, for example, in Baal, Lord God, as it would be understood as. And so Nergal has the face of a lion. We get accounts both before and after the flood of these lion men. And they show up on reliefs in Egypt, and they show up on reliefs in Mesopotamia, and they show up in two different forms. One will have a body of a lion and the head of a human, similar to like a centaur, and other ones will have the head of a lion and the body of a man. And again, I have a great handout or a document on this for people who want to get a hold of me, where I can you can walk through it in sort of detail to get a hold of me. And so you have what's going on is you have these cherubim lion-faced angels who are procreating with human females and creating offspring that would have looked just like them. And when we look at other deities and other countries, like in Egypt, you have let's say Mahis, which is a lion type of god as well, who also produced offspring. So they recorded these lions with heads and bodies on reliefs in Luxor. And they were the offspring of Mahis or Misses, which was a son of Ra or Ta. They're called by both of those names. And the word M-A in Egyptian was a word that meant lion. And again, they produced offspring, and they would have looked just like them. Wow. So the lion is also sort of reminiscent of a sphinx as well. You get different sphinxes around the world. Some of them have the face of a man. Some of them have a face of a lion. Some of them have a face of a bull. And some of them, like more akin to the griffins, have a face of a bird. Yeah. So I think these are depictions of the cherubim gods. And we also have reliefs in Sumeria where you have the Anunnaki, which were watchers. And by the way, if people aren't sure that we can use that term watcher for the sons of God, or the watchers, which are the ones who are always awake around the throne, you have in Daniel 4 times the word watcher used. And that goes back to the word Ayer, which means watcher, and to be awake. And that is the term that the book of Enoch talked about. And these watchers come from the throne of God and likely are seraphim because they're dealing with governance, just as we talked about the hierarchy before that. So you have in Sumeria, you have depictions of Anunnaki watchers who have wings, and they have the face of a man, but other ones have a face of an eagle. And so if they would have taken any of those other faces, they would have produced offspring that would have looked like them as well. And what's also interesting about that notion is that we get in places like Southeast Asia, you get creatures called the Tengu, which were giant warriors and priests who were offspring of the watchers. And they look just like them. So if you Google Tengu, you're going to bring up these eagle-faced giants. Or if you're going to go into the Popol Vuh, you have the Zilbaba, and they were owl-faced demigods. Like they also had the House of Bat, which was part of them, which were bat-faced. And you Google Camazotz, you're going to get like this uniform or this armor that Batman wears. So I think there's a sense here that following the ideology that if they procreated, they would have looked just like them. It also sort of makes sense when we look at all of the kings, both before and after the flood, or at least immediately after the flood. They look just like their fathers.
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
So they're serpentine. And the serpent and dragon imagery is all about the royals.
Sure
And
it
then
is.
you wonder if the cherubim took a form with their human face, was that like a dark-haired giant
Right.
or like a dark-haired characteristic? Because Gilgamesh is depicted with dark hair. And he's also depicted as taller and larger than the Rephaim. So does that mean perhaps that the Aryans and the dark-haired giants of Mesopotamia and elsewhere, that they would have come from the cherubim versus the seraphim watcher? Again, we can only speculate on that, but it seems to me that you have these warriors, and they're not part of the governing class of the lion men, but they're part of the warrior class. And that's the only depictions we get of them. We don't get them as kings or priests.
Right.
Well, that's very interesting stuff. I just found out that my name is Ariel in Hebrew. I just wanted to put that out there. That's very interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and in I was just going to say, maybe I should throw out the name that they were called in the Sumerian accounting. So you've got a few different names. The most common one would be the Halulo of Sumerian legend, and they were a lion man race. So there's no doubt that this is some sort of hybrid being as a lion man.
Right.
And they showed no mercy. They were warriors of ancient Babylon and Akkad, so post-Diluvian, just like the lion men and the lion-like men of Gad. And that they also there's also another king that might reflect this lion-like warrior type of being. And in the War of Giants in Genesis 14, you have these 4 Mesopotamian kings that are going to go and absolutely change the world order and the power structure as they do their romp through the Middle East to take out, the Rephaim and the Emim, and eventually we'll get to the kings of the Sodom and Gomorrah Pentapolis who had rebelled and were under the protection of these powerful giant empires in the Covenant Land area, and they get to them last. But one of the kings is Arioch, and that means lion-like. And he's from the same area as where in Samaria where Nergal was worshipped. So again, you get all of these connections, and these are post-Diluvian connections versus the antediluvian ones. And so again, it goes to either they survived or there was a second incursion and multiple incursions and by multiple watchers.
Wow.
That's very, very interesting.
That was really good.
So yeah, I notice a lot of people when I talk about the lion men, they try to just say, oh no, they're just saying that they're fierce warriors. Just imagine a guy with a beard and long hair. I'm like, dude, that's not what it's saying. Clearly it's not what it's saying. It's saying as a head of a lion, not a guy with a big beard. So I just want to put that out there, that people that want to try to say that it's just a guy with a beard who's very angry, that's just a bunch of nonsense.
Yeah, Gary, I'm reading up.
Yeah, Gibberim means mighty men, the mighty ones.
Yeah.
And the Gadites were the wilderness men that derives from Gibberim. I don't think you can sort of just I get how people would like to not deal with what's always written in the most supernatural book ever written.
Mm-hmm.
But we should not run away from it. We should try and understand it, because nothing is new under the sun. What was will be again. And we may be facing some of this kind of stuff.
We're already
as we get
doing
closer to the last 7 years.
It's already happening. I mean, it's not a conspiracy anymore. Cloning's real. In China, they make these hybrid pig human things, hybrid monkeys, supposedly for organs for humans. But they're letting these things live. They're doing experiments with them. That's why all these things are being seen around the world, and these weird creatures washing up on shore. In my opinion, those are the experiments they threw away.
Yeah.
Or the ones that got away.
And we get a couple of examples out of prehistory as well. So, like before the flood, that's where the term chimera comes from, right? All of these chimera grafting of intermixing of species, and chimera was an actual being as well in Greek mythology, and it had the body and the head of a lion.
Wow.
And it had a goat head on the back and, and a serpent's tail.
Yeah.
That's a no for me.
Got me with goat.
It breathed fire.
Well, those things, someone had to take them out, right? Someone got to take those things out.
And then King Humbaba, or Humbada, depending on which version of the Epic of Gilgamesh that you're going to read, he was known as the terrible one of the terrible ones, who was the king of the cedar forest on Mount Hermon. And he was created and given a special commission to do terrible things to humankind. And he had the face and the paws of a lion. And he had bull horns. And he had eagle-type claws, and he was covered in scales. And he had the tail and the phallus of the that had a serpent's head at the end of each.
Oh my God! So
so definitely a post-diluvian chimera.
Wouldn't you're saying all these things, I believe it 100%. But what makes me think is that wouldn't these things give out other diseases, or wouldn't they get other, because how certain animals give certain kind of diseases and humans don't? Would these things be able to do that? Maybe they started a lot of the diseases, or they started a lot of the flus or stuff like that. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it certainly could be, because when you're starting to corrupt the original nature with outside influences of whatever is being done with things being grafted in, because I think the chimera is something different than creation of a giant. I think it is, may partially have something to do with semen or something like that, but you've got DNA manipulation going on here to get that many kinds of parts. There's something else that's going on there. And if you are including other animals to create the chimera type of being, then who knows what is being entered in. And if there's intermarriage into the human race, which we see throughout our history with the spurious offspring, that could certainly be the root to a lot of diseases within us. There's a lot of people I've talked to, they speculate on that's how many of these diseases came about. I mean, we don't know, but that's their theory.
I would assume these things have a very, they're not, a lot of medical issues, I would say, with that many DNAs in one body, all those different animals, chimera, I would assume that they would have a lot of health issues,
Yeah, who knows? Who knows? And we don't know whether or not they were given some of the gifts that the Rephaim and the Nephilim had. That word Rephaim, for giant after the flood, it's 7497 in the Strong's lexicon of the Hebrew, and 7496 is related to it. It means demon spirit, evil spirit, shade, words like that, disembodied spirit. And both of those come from the root word 7495, which means to heal or healer, or to be a doctor or something like that. So let's say an angel that would be named like Raphael would mean healer of God, or God heals, depending on how you want to translate that. And in the Ugaritic texts, the Rephaim that we were talking about earlier, not only were they the dynastic kings and the giants and the heroes, and noting the Epic of Gilgamesh has a Ugaritic version as well that's identical to the Sumerian version, and so Gilgamesh was recognized within those texts and described with the same size and everything like that. But they were described as being able to be, they're actually called saviors, like in an Antichrist type aspect, and that they could heal. And they could not only heal themselves, but also heal others. And so it's thought that they had the ability, if they lost a thumb or an arm, they could have that grow back and they could help do that with others, or they had technology. But we don't get anything biblically that would suggest technology, but some of the polytheist versions would suggest that the sarcophagus and sarcophagi, as in multiple, had technologies that would help them heal if they got back to their sarcophagus. Again, don't get anything on that biblically. I think it was probably more of a natural thing. That's why you had to take their head, so that they didn't have a chance to repair their bodies. So when we look at that that repairing capability, that means that one would presume that they could, if they had that gift like the Rephaim did and the Nephilim did, that they could self-heal. But when you start creating these chimera type things, I don't know whether or not they get that gift, probably not, and I don't know what else is being grafted in there that would have opened up that door to those diseases. So just a couple other things to throw in there. It's quite a layer of things that we get out of the Bible, and then what we see was going on in polytheist history.
Yeah, I just, I thought about that when you were saying about this creature you're describing, and I just think nothing, things don't just come from nothing. Like where all these diseases come from, all these bird flu, avian flu, whatever, rat flu, all these things that are coming out. I mean, some of them are probably man-made, but how did the man make it? What did they learn how to make it from? It has to come from somewhere, all this stuff.
I printed this before the show. It's off of one of my documents I have, and it comes out of the Pistis Sophia, which is a Gnostic gospel. Mm-hmm. But there's a description within this gospel that is absolutely frightening in terms of what these angels might have looked like.
Okay.
And there are 12 that they're talking about, like the 12 archons, which are of the major antediluvian gods. So there is, I won't go through them all, but I'll give a few out. And the first ruler in the first dungeon had a crocodile's face, and whose tail is in his mouth. And I don't know whether that's sort of an Ouroboros type of concept or what's going on. And out of the jaws of this dragon, so he's called a dragon as a crocodile, just as Sobek was, an Egyptian crocodile dog, but also considered sort of reptilian or perhaps seraphim or dragon. It says, out of the jaws of the dragon cometh all ice and all dust and all cold and all different diseases.
Wow.
Here we go.
I just had to throw that out. And I'll just go through a couple other looks of these ones.
Wow.
In the second dungeon, it has a lion's face or a cat's face, and it's named Karakar. And in the third one, it has a dog's face, which is Arkarok, and that sort of brings into the dogmen, right? And that you have Anubis, who was a jackal god, who produced offspring in the Egyptian mythos as well, and that he produced so many offspring that they had their own city, and it was called Sinopolis, which means dog city.
Wow, Sinos. What's the name of this document you're reading? I want to look into this. What's it called?
It is Pistis Sophia.
How do you spell the first one?
Pistis.
Pistis, Sophia.
Okay.
And this is coming out of book 4, chapter 126.
Okay, thank you. I definitely got to look into that. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, it's just stunning. And then the fourth dragon was one with a serpent's face, and his name was Akrakar. And then the fifth one was a bull's face. And then the sixth one was a boar's face, or a wild boar. Another one was a bear's face. Another one is an eagle's face.
Nothing less than interesting.
Yeah. And so, again, I won't go through them all, but so when we go through some of these other creations that are out there that people talk about, Bigfoot sort of comes to mind, right?
It does.
You wonder, is that part bear, or is that part monkey or ape? And you get gods in the Indian pantheon, in southeastern pantheons, where you've got ape and elephant gods, and you just wonder how many different looks these orders had, and did all of them reproduce at a certain time? It's hard to know. So,
wow, Gary, touch on your new book. I'm looking at the stuff here. It says this is gonna be a great book. I've got the a few chapters and sections here.
yeah.
You got the preface, got the hierarchy of the NEPHILIM, the hybrid human Canaanite confederacy, the post-Diluvian Raphaim world order, section 5, the covenant land Raphaim wars. It's got a lot of good stuff in here.
Yeah, it's a book in response to people getting a hold of me. And, I said I would never write a sequel to the Genesis 6 conspiracy, because I didn't want to be redundant. I just thought it would just be more, right?
Right.
And I hadn't been out in the public domain before I published the book, so I had no idea whether or not people everywhere were not being taught what was in the Bible and things like that. So I was a little bit unaware. But the contact with the people getting a hold of me is they want more information. They want to go deeper into the Bible.
Yes.
And so I set aside a book I was 300 pages into, and I started to do this. And so it can be read independently of the first book. And it's not all that redundant. There is some redundancy just so people can sort of follow the narrative of the second book. But there's no need to read one without the other, but one will probably lead you to want to read the other. And so this one is specifically targeted at Christians who want to go deeper into the Bible than has been gone into before. I don't think there's any research that is out there on the market like this book, and nowhere close to it. It is as unique as the first book, but super unique as far as a Christian document goes, so to speak. So what I'm trying to do here is a number of things. Is to answer the questions that came to me, and you can't answer them all, but I got a lot in here, and it's only 84 chapters, but it's probably just as long as the first book. So.
I was looking at that. It's pretty long.
Yeah, and I'm just going through the typeset of it now, and it looks like it's just as long. Because I did this on the font, I only had like 600 pages, but as the book comes out, it looks like there's going to be 800 pages. So again, I'm a little bit off on the number on that. But and so what I wanted to do on this book was also show people why it's important to understand prehistory, to understand the full context of prophecy. And also wanted the people to sort of start thinking about that English is a very poor communicator of the original Hebrew and the original Greek, or that the translation should have been longer and put more of the larger meaning and context of the older words into the New Testament. So that's why I want the footnotes on the same page. So if I'm talking about Oiketarian, which I do, it's in this book. You've got all the references and the definitions and the sources that you need on that. So I wanted to go through and I wanted to identify things in prehistory that are important to understand end time prophecy. So that's why the first sections of the book is it's taking people deeper into the Bible in terms of what it says about the angels, and I give the hierarchical order in this book as well, and both the invisible and the visible. And so that people can understand what the New Testament is really talking about when it's talking about the visible and the invisible. And I wanted to show how much information was in there on angels, and I wanted to show people how much was in there on giants, because there's way more information in there on giants. And I also wanted to give people the arguments that can be sort of grouped together so that they can use this as that reference book and go to that section and just pull out that information that they need on it. And so I walked through all of that, and then that's the basis to understand the wars that and also go through the hybrid nations as well. So what I'll do with the giants is I'll take them back to a likely patriarch's name. In other words, a godfather, celestial mafia, fallen angels. And also for the hybrid nations, I'll take that back to, I think, who the patriarch was for the hybrid nation. So I'll give you the Amorite patriarch. I'll give you the Jebusite patriarch, and on and on and on for the ones that are in the table of nations. So, and then I take that into as all context for understanding the wars of the Exodus, and then I walk through all of the campaigns and right through to the time of King Solomon with all of these giant wars that are going on. And, you know, I was talking with L.A. Marzulli, and he had wanted to get a hold of me, and he said he was showing a little bit of information on one of the documents I had out there on the on Absalom, and that you know, when I started walking through it, he was absolutely you know, taken aback and just saying, "Boy, this information. I mean, you know, who would have?" Nobody out there is doing this type of research where you're connecting Absalom to being the son of David and Maacah, of the Maacathaim of the Mount Hermon region that he took in wife, and entering in that kind of, the Maacathaim are one of the Rephaim tribes.
That's wild.
Right?
Wow.
And all of a sudden Absalom is going to cause a rebellion to try and take over the monarchy and start a hybrid dynastic line and usurp the Holy Covenant, the covenant blessings, and the covenant birthright, just as the Amalekites tried to do by wiping Israel from the face of the earth. So through Eliphaz and marriage of Timnah. And so I get into these relationships and start explaining that history. And then I take those main terms and I start turning that towards end time prophecies, because you're going to need to know these to understand the full context of what's going on in end time prophecy. And I lay out my approach to end time prophecy in the preface, and then I start to show how that fits together with all of these terms. And again, you can't do all of end time prophecy, but I show the chronology that people are going to need. And I'm going to take that through the last 7 years and end it with Armageddon.
Wow. That is excellent. I never heard that part you were just speaking about about Ali Marzulli. That's very interesting. Wow.
It's again, once you start to understand the keys as to if that nation isn't in the table of nations, where did they come from?
Exactly.
And it goes to that sort of key that I talked about earlier. Any nation that had a Rephaim patriarch, that Rephaim wasn't listed in the table of nations. And just as, you know, the Anakim, the Emim, none of those nations were listed as a nation or a patriarch in the table of nations. if they've got no connections whatsoever other than just showing up in the Bible, they are a Rephaim nation. So then it's just a matter of connecting those nations to what it says in relationship to other passages in the Bible to bring that information out.
Wow, that's going to be an excellent book. Excellent. I'm reading down these chapters, and there's some giant tribes I never heard of, like the what's the word, the Archites, I believe it is.
Yeah, that's a hybrid. So
Sinites. I mean, there's Sidonians.
yeah, so those are the part of the Canaanite tribes, right? And they don't have a patriarch. They have a family of the name, but you don't get the patriarch. So that's a hybrid nation that has a Rephaim patriarch and took a daughter from either Canaan, Heth, or Sidon.
Right.
And the other, when you get into the three patriarchs that are listed, it's those three that are supplying the daughters. So Canaan first, before Babel, is already going bad because of the curse of Ham, and he's supplying daughters to the fallen angels to create the original Rephaim after the flood.
Wow.
And that creates the Rephaim. And then you have those Rephaim that are going to intermarry with other daughters of Canaan and other daughters of Sidon and Heth, or Sidon and Heth are going to intermarry with daughters of Rephaim to create hybrid nations, because they're definitely hybrids as the descriptions we get on them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yet they're listed in the table of nations because they are sons of Canaan. So you get the human lineage, and then afterwards their lineage is no longer, because they've created these hybrid sort of branches. And just as Nimrod intermarried likely with the Elamites. And Elam are some of the original of the Rephaim after the flood, and it goes back to the word Olam, which means east and ancient. And some people might even take that to before the flood, but they're the aboriginals of the Mesopotamian region, and those are the ones that Nimrod marries into to start those hybrid dynasties of the beast empires, like that show up in Assyria, but you would have Akkad and Babylon as well. And also the Elamites are the ones that are intermarrying with the Aryan Persians of the Achaemenid dynasties, which takes their lineage back to the dark-haired giants of southern Greece and in that area. And they produce the Persian beast empire. So what I also do as I walk through this is I'm laying down the roots for the beast empires and where they come from and why they're called beast empires. And that all of them have Antichrist type figures. They just don't have the Antichrist because it's not the ordained time.
Wow, that sounds like podcast for the next 10 years. That's a lot.
Yeah, I think it'll keep me busy for a while.
Oh, yeah, that's excellent. I'm just looking at this right here. I have a little screenshot of it. I believe you released this on Facebook. I'm looking at the little excerpts.
I did, yeah.
And just going down it. Wow, that's a lot of stuff. Just really quick before closing out. So when David's mighty men were among the linemen, they were absolutely fighting against the linemen. There was no coalition with the linemen.
Of Moab, but the lion-like men of the Gadites fought with David.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and there's a Makathim in the mighty men as well. And there's Uriah the Hittite as well. So there's other hybrids and giant-like people that are in there. Not all of them are from Israel. So, again, you have to be careful when you have the mighty men of David's mighty men. It goes back to the Hebrew word Gibborim.
Right.
But Gibborim doesn't always mean giant. It could just mean brave, strong, noble, things like that, right?
So the Gadites, they were linemen, though.
Yes.
Wow. See, these are things that most of us don't know about. I mean, we've heard about the linemen of Moab and the Gadites. I just wanted to connect that dot. If they were, in fact, some of them were with David, and it's kind of like Lord of the Rings type of style.
Yeah. Lord of the Flies. Yeah.
Something like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, what I'm hoping is that if people thought the first book, and a lot of comments I get back from people is they say for the first time the Old Testament makes sense to me and it comes to life and I'm enjoying reading it. If you liked that level, you're going to love really getting into it and understanding how much more connections of the preternatural that are there,
Right.
and what Israel was up against. And they were literally, an island in a sea of beast empires.
Wow. That's amazing. This is a great podcast. Thank you, Gary, for coming on. It is super.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you so much for everything. That was a good hour and a half show. We got a lot of information. I can't wait for your new book. And like I said, I'm always learning. I'm always a student. Now, the information you have can blow my mind if I get too much in one day. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's just endless, and nobody's ever going to know everything. But, the more you look, the more you find. And it's amazing. And once you start to see how some things connect, you'll see how other things connect. And in my research, I'm a little bit fortunate. I tend to see patterns. And when I start to see patterns, it's a sign to say, how far does that pattern go? And just sort of run it down. And then you get larger pieces of the puzzle that you can put together.
Amen to that. So thank you, Gary, for coming on again. I think this is like the 6th, 7th time you've been on here. You're a regular guest now. So, and we definitely got to do another Halloween podcast and expand on it for the anniversary.
All right, my friends. My name is Bishop HOLSONBACK. This is my YouTube channel, my Facebook group, and my Rumble platform. I want to welcome all who's tuned in. My friends, before I get started, let me check the audio. All right, my friends, the audio is kind of low. I can see that. I'll try to do some adjustments when I go on. All right, my friends, I'm going to give a little testimony about myself. All right, my friends, I lived a rough life. I was stabbed in my heart in a knife fight. When this happened, a cluster of lights came onto me, a big cluster of lights. I was calm. I mean, most people would have been freaked out. I mean, I wanted to be freaked out, but I couldn't because of these lights. So that sent me on a search. And this is when I came across the name of Yahweh. My friends, God, Lord, is a title, not a name. Our Creator's name is Yahweh, and He wants to be called by His name. All right? Well, when I first was told Yahweh's name, I wanted to break out in tears. Because all the lies I've been told, all the schooling I have learned was a waste of time. My friends, lie number 2 is to hide the cosmology of the earth. All right? They cannot have the masses praying in Yahweh's name. They can't have, in the true cosmology. All right. So on my path, after I find out about Yahweh, Yeshua, I started getting into the book of Enoch. You know, my friends, I've studied the book of Enoch for 12 years. And chapter 1 says this book it will be revealed to a remote generation. We are that remote generation. My friends, we are in the fig tree generation right now, and we're in the sorrows. All right? But Yahweh has changed my life for the better, my friends. Once I started building a relationship with Yahweh, a conscious contact, Yahweh has just lifted veil after veil after veil for me. I told Yahweh, give me a platform where I can proclaim your name. So I started a Facebook group that's at 30,000 people right now. 30,000 people. It's called Seeking Yahweh's Word, and it's on Facebook. All right? There's like-minded people in my group. Come join us. Also, I have the YouTube channel, the Rumble platform as well. My friends, Yahweh will move mountains for you. Is that what you want? You can manifest big, big things in your life once you build a conscious contact with Yahweh. Yes, my friends. Your body, your heart has a herbs. Plants, animals have hertz, but not like the human heart. The human heart puts out a 1.9 hertz, a frequency, a vibration. Well, this frequency, this vibration, you can connect to Yahweh. Yes, my friends. You can connect and manifest big, big things in your life just by using the name of Yahweh instead of God, Lord. And this ain't a Jew thing. No. This is not a Jew thing at all. Because, my friends, they've hid it from us just as well. You know? Yeshua, when you're pronouncing a Hebrew word, it's from the right to the left. Shua, right? I just want to throw that out there, my friends. All right, my friends. The next, after I studied the book of Enoch, I got into other books. The Gospels of Thomas is one right here. I've only had this for a couple of months now, but it's a very good book. And of course, we got Gary Wayne's book, Genesis 6 Conspiracy by Gary Wayne. You know, I don't know why Gary comes to me. He don't come to anybody's show monthly. He comes to our show monthly. I think he does a monthly broadcast with Zen Garcia's son, Justin. And it's called Ask Me Anything. But he comes to our show monthly. My friends, Gary is a great, great mentor to me. I've asked him millions and millions of questions, and he's always gotten back to me. And he'll do you the same way. Gary will go out his way to make sure. It might not be in the first week, 2 weeks, but he will get back to you, my friends. All right. Just check this out, my friends. Enochian mysticism. What is Enochian mysticism? Who taught Enochian mysticism? My friends, Cain got kicked out of the garden and he was sentenced to the land of Nod. In Nod, he builds a city called Enoch. There must have been people there for him to build a city. All right? And if the fallen angels fell to earth, to Mount Hermon, and taught humans, perverted the knowledge, they surely went to the land of Nod and taught Cain, Enochian mysticism. After Cain, he taught his son, the bad Enoch. All right? And then who did the bad Enoch teach? Nimrod, Tubal Cain. Yes, my friends. In your holy Bible says that Nimrod became a Gibberim. How did he become a Gibberim? Through Enochian mysticism, through Enochian magic. This is what the elite is trying to do in today's time as well. All right, my friends? And my view is Nazi Germany gave up their motherland to seek new lands beyond the ice ring. Yes, my friends, I am a flat earther. I've always have been, and I want to show you some pics. Right above me is the UN flag and the flat earth map. What is the UN doing with the flat earth map as their logo? Hello? You know, I get made fun of a lot for being a flat earther. I'm telling you, my friends, you don't know the true cosmology of this earth. I'm not saying I do. I'm just saying we've been lied to. And lie number one was to hide your creator's name. They could not have the masses praying in Yahweh's name. All right? And they want to confuse you about Enoch, the Enochian calendar, Enochian mysticism, the bad Enoch, the good Enoch. I can go on and on. They want to confuse you about who Enoch really was. My friends, Yahweh admired Enoch. He didn't have to die. He was taken up to heaven at the age of 365. All right? The angels admired Enoch. I mean, my friends, he's seventh from Adam and Eve, Noah's great-grandfather. This is how the books got crossed over from antediluvian times and today's time is through Noah. All right, my friends, what is the UN doing with the flat earth map as their logo? It's something to think about. I think both parties need to come together, all right, and have a conference in remembrance of Rob Skiba. Yes, my friends, we need a conference. We need to put this out there to the people. And the only way to do it is through a conference, YouTube platforms, and other platforms. But to proclaim Yahweh's name is part of our jobs for every single one of us. And how you can do it is by telling somebody about Yahweh and his name. Your creator's name is Yahweh. The Son of Man name is Oshua, the Son of Man. The book of Enoch, all it talks about is the return of Oshua. It states in the book of Enoch, chapter 69, I believe, that when Oshua's name has been revealed, he is near. Well, his name is being revealed to you tonight. He is near, my friends. And you can take that to the bank. All right, my friends, I want to thank all who's tuned in and stayed tuned in. I want to thank Jimmy for helping me moderate the show. Brother Jimmy. I want to thank Cynthia and others that commented in the comment box. It takes a lot for me to come on air. I know it takes a lot for you to comment in the comment box. And I want to thank those who do. All right? So it's hard to put yourself out there. But we must, my friends, to proclaim Yahweh's name to the masses. All right. Gary Wayne will be on this program the third Thursday of this month. We're going to be talking about the 5 worst demons. Yes, my friends. I'm talking with Gary has done a lot of research, and there is so many more demons than we've been told about. All right? There's a lot of demons. Leviathan. I could go on and Abyssal-Bee and all these others. All right? All right, my friends. So please come join us the third Thursday of every single month. Gary Wayne is here. It gives you the chance to ask Gary questions live. All right, my friends. I worked hard to get Gary here. He's here on our show. So please come tune in with me. All right. Much love. I thank y'all all from the bottom of my heart. I'd like to end this program in a prayer. Father Yahweh, we, Father, offer ourselves to you. To build with us and to do with us is thy wilt. Relieve us of the bondage of self, that we better do your will and not our own will. Father, take away our difficulties, that our victories may bear witness over the people we will help, Father, of thy power, thy love, and by thy way of life. Father, there's people out here that just heard your name for the first time, Yahweh. These are the ones that need to see your magnificent power, Father. Heal them, bless them, put hands on them, guide them, Father. They're coming in your name. Hallelujah! Praise Yahweh's name. Praise Yahweh's name.